Thank you so much to our panelists for that really inspiring and extremely informative panel. And now it's time for the sponsor perspective of our program. Please welcome Christina Hulk, Senior Director and Head of Strategic Alliance Development at Alexion AstraZeneca Rare Disease, and Julia Jenkins, Executive Director of the Every Life Foundation for Rare Disease.
So as you heard from previous panelists, rare diseases are really not so rare at all. 1 in 10 Americans have a rare disease. So between caregivers, families, and patients, rare disease affects almost every one of us. We've made some great strides over the past 40 years. Before the Orphan Drug Act, there was almost 40 therapies for rare disease. Now we have more than 600. So today, we're going to be discussing the Orphan Drug Act and how the Orphan Drug Act provided the regulatory flexibilities as well as research and development incentives to meet the unique challenges of rare disease drug development. But we still have a long way to go. Almost 90% of rare diseases do not have an FDA-approved therapy. So how do we make sure in the next 40 years, every patient has access to a therapy? I'm Christina Hochul, and I'm head of our Strategic Alliance Development function at Alexion AstraZeneca Rare Disease. And I am joined today by Julia Jenkins, the Executive Director of the Every Life Foundation. Julia has been at the foundation from its inception in 2009, and she has worked on extensively on both federal and state policy issues. She's worked on 21st century cures, newborn screening legislation, and even user fees. So Julia, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you to the Hill as well. Thank you, Alexion. Thank you all for celebrating Rare Disease Day. Very important day for the rare disease community, and our advocates are here for Rare Disease Week on Capitol Hill this week. We're also celebrating the foundation's 14th birthday today. So lots of things to celebrate this morning. We were an organization that was founded by a researcher, drug developer, who faced a number of challenges trying to develop an ultra-rare disease drug, and really wanted to make sure that there was a patient organization that could focus and address the specific challenges.
No, that's wonderful. And I guess, how have you seen the patient's voice kind of grow during your time at Every Life?
Yeah, I think one of my favorite things about our organization is that our mission has expanded, and our goal is to make sure that patients have a voice in public policy and regulatory decision-making and in drug development. And we all learned at the last panel about how important patient-focused drug development is. I've had the honor to work alongside the actual patients and parent advocates to advocate for bills such as the 21st Century Cures Act. Kids v. Cancer did the pediatric priority review voucher. It's been the patients themselves, just like when Abby Myers passed the Orphan Drug Act. It's the patients that have to pass the legislation. And it's been really just inspiring to watch them lift and move mountains to help save their children.
Yeah. And how many patients do you have coming to Capitol Hill this week?
Yeah, so we're really excited. We have, I think, 500 patients and 300 different rare disease organizations.
Wow.
We'll have about 350 Hill meetings on Thursday.
Oh my gosh, that's wonderful. I love hearing about that many rare disease patients being able to come to Capitol Hill, being able to talk to lawmakers about how important this is. So let's talk more about the Orphan Drug Act. Can you tell me kind of what it's meant for the rare disease patient's journey?
Well, I think one of the things we don't talk about with the Orphan Drug Act is that it created our community. It defined who we were as a community. It gave us our voice. It united us under shared challenges and really enabled us to start creating solutions that will benefit our community. So that's a celebration. We're only a 40-year-old movement. And I think we're just at or maybe not the very beginning, but the middle of the movement. We've got a long way to go.
I like that. What do you think about the next 40 years? What do you think the landscape's going to look like then?
To be honest, I'm nervous.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of progress in rare disease and the science. We started the foundation. We didn't even use the C word, cures. They weren't scientifically possible. So we have an Orphan Drug Act bill that was designed when cures weren't possible. But rare diseases is in the larger biotech ecosystem. So when we see pieces of legislation like the Inflation Reduction Act that decreases the incentive to develop treatments for patients, rare diseases are the canary in the coal mine. We've already seen pipelines decrease, trials canceled. And so what I really hope is that that patient voice that I was talking about earlier, that when lawmakers work and regulators work to implement this legislation, that the patient voice is heard, and when there's opportunities to improve and fix the legislation, that the patient voice is heard loud and clear about what is needed for our community.
How are we going to build on the ODA, and like how do we make sure we're headed in this right direction?
Yeah, I think it is an exciting time with the advancement of science, and the rare disease community is united. The patients are mobilized, and that's fantastic. We need to build back what the ODA was. The orphan drug tax credit was cut. We've seen other pullbacks. We heard from the earlier panel about the need for maybe a different standard for what rare diseases can be developed. I mean, that's a controversial thing. But I think there's a misunderstanding in our community that rare disease drugs got something different in the ODA. But the fact is that a treatment for 10 patients in the US is held to the same standard as a treatment for 10 million patients. The same manufacturing standards, the same regulatory standards, the same safety and efficacy standards, which, as one of our previous panelists said, is crazy. And so we really need to work together to figure out what the solutions are for our community.
And I think it's really interesting kind of how your organization was started. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So we were founded to improve the regulatory and drug development process for rare diseases. So in the early days, talking about the need to give access to accelerated approval for rare diseases. Back then, no one knew what we're talking about. No one knew what accelerated approval was. Now it's in the headlines of newspapers. Though we're seeing even more challenges for access to accelerated approval pathway. We've certainly made progress as far as, one of our big goals was making sure that the FDA could keep up on the latest science.
Yes.
That FDA really understands what rare diseases are, but we're still fighting those same battles. We still need an FDA Center of Excellence for rare diseases. We need the FDA to have a larger approach to rare diseases, a strategic approach that really helps guide these rare and oftentimes ultra rare diseases through.
No, definitely. And I think the unique part about rare diseases is patients aren't really just patients. They do, fundraise, and some of them have to go out there and and try to access a cure. And it is really personal to me because as a child I did have a rare disease, and I was fortunate to have access to a therapy that really improved my condition. And so I know there's still a lot more to be done for the other 90% of people out there. But the ODA has really led to a lot of this research and development in the US. And so I guess for you is like, how has the ODA have been viewed across the globe? And and kind of just elaborate more on that.
Sure. So I actually had the opportunity to go to Rare Disease Week Brussels earlier this year, or earlier this month. I guess it's still February today, the last day. We partner with Eurydice to bring patients to the European Parliament because they're actually updating their orphan drug legislation. But it really did inspire other countries to implement legislation to look at how we can make sure that we bring these treatments through the development process. But there's still huge access challenges, both here in the US and globally. And that really threatens the ecosystem for drug development. So again, we've got a lot of work to do. I do think when we look globally, if you're a patient organization that wants to get treatments to your patient community, we have to start looking globally and start working together with our global partners to figure out how we can solve these challenges.
Well, it's great to see the U.S. kind of be a leader in this space and have other countries kind of adopt this pathway. So I guess what kind of message do you have for policymakers, or people that are watching? And so how can we ensure that the U.S. kind of remains at this forefront around the innovation for rare diseases?
Yeah, I think we invite everyone to join and follow the rare disease community this week. We ask members of Congress to join the Rare Disease Caucus. We ask people to wear their stripes, their zebra stripes, bring awareness. Our community is still young. There needs to be more global awareness about rare diseases, about how it impacts the family members. Frank, our board chair, talked about our economic burden study for rare diseases. What he didn't mention was that the $1 trillion was only for 379 rare diseases. Wow. I do want to correct some stats that were said earlier. There are probably more like 10,000 different rare diseases. There's a debate scientifically, but I'm going to go with 10,000. So there's 10,000 rare diseases. How are we going to solve for all of those families? And you're right. We need a system that allows patients to be patients. They shouldn't have to start their own nonprofit. They shouldn't have to fundraise. They shouldn't have to find the researchers. They shouldn't have to try to find a drug company or start their own drug company. That's really unacceptable for what the burden falls on our community. And I hope that all of you can help us help move the needle. We have to change policy and save lives.
Julie, I just want to thank you so much for joining me today and everyone in the room for caring about rare diseases and learning more. So I'm sure you can go to Every Life's website. They have infinite resources. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation.